It is live now.
Okay, okay, okay. So let's start the class. In fact, we are meeting after a very long time after we left off in January. So this is MDI 007. In fact, MDI 007 and 008 are both economic subjects. And in fact, 7 and 8 need to be read together. And sometimes I feel that possibly the 8 should have been 7 and 7 should have been 8, in the sense 8 talks about the processes, the production, the processes, and how things have moved in terms of the way things were produced, how the economies have moved. And this particular MDI 7 is about labor and labor markets. Now, the question is, why do we need, as students of migration and diaspora, to know about labor, labor markets, production, industrialization, etc.? Can anybody answer me this? Why do we need to know about labor and labor markets? Take a guess. Who would like to take a guess? Why would we need to, know about labor, labor markets, etc.? Any person? Would anybody like to take a guess as to why do we need to know about labor and labor markets?
Yes, sir. Properly, labor requirement is a primary and important component for migration.
Absolutely. In fact, a lot of migration happens in terms of employment, in terms of, to earn money, to be able to have a good quality of life. So labor becomes a very important factor. And to understand how this labor moves, in fact, 7 is about labor and labor markets, whereas 8 is about production, how the whole concept of industry, factories, and the production and the employment has changed over a period of time. So both need to be read together. And even when you're doing an assignment or preparing for your end term examination, it's good if you read both of them together, because then you will be able to answer questions and able to have a better understanding. Okay. Again, this particular 7, MDI 7, has a lot of economic content in it. So if you are not an economic student, you might try very hard to grapple with the content, because it has been written by an economics professor or an economics teacher. What I have tried to do in terms of these presentations is I have try to make it as simple so that broad based any student of any discipline is able to understand the larger aspect of labor and labor markets, as well as production, industry, and how the employment and etc. is going. So both 7 and 8 I have simplified to get any student to understand. And I always tell all my students, the way to do today is to get hold of a keyword, and if you want to study more or read more or get more information, use that keyword to do a little search. You can go into Chat GPT, you can go into Google, always, but always understand the fact that Chat GPT and Google can give you erroneous results. So always cross verify whatever is said. Do not take anything on internet as a gospel of truth. Please always cross verify and see the source from which you are getting information from. Internet has a lot of misinformation, as is Chat GPT. So, or DeepSeek, whichever AI you are using. But a good point is to use a keyword and search more information on that particular keyword. So without much ado, and again, the norms of this class are the same. You can stop me at any moment of time to ask a question or to add something that you feel will benefit the class in terms of other students. You can ask me a question or send it on chat, whichever based on wherever you are sitting, and you can access the mic or not. And feel free to add, as I said, this is an experiential class. It's not a monologue kind of a class. It's an experiential class. So you are free to join in and add wherever you think you can add value. let's quickly get into concept of measurement. So some of the objectives, meanings and difference between growth and development, qualitative and quantitative, and the various forms of HDI, PQLI, GDI, and other development indices. We shall see as we go along. Now, more often than not, we need to understand that economics is not a science. Economics cannot be put in a lab and tested like a science. You cannot do an experiment. So, more often than not, economists, and most of the scholars in the field of economics try to create model based on what they see in the world, and based on what they see in the world is obviously colored by their own prejudices and bias and understanding. Remember, human being is not objective, and every time somebody says I'm giving you an objective version, please understand there is nothing called objective, everything is subjective. So, and we will see as we go along that economic theories have changed with the times. It's contextual. Based on a particular context, a theory comes, and that theory then possibly goes into disuse. Possibly the theory is regurgitated, put in a new bottle, and brought out as a new theory. So, we will engage with some of these. More often than not, also understand most people want to measure things, and the only way to measure things is a quantitative way, which is numbers. Think about it. Through your whole life, through our whole life, we have always been judged in terms of the marks that we get in an examination. We are intelligent if we get good marks. We are not intelligent if we get bad marks. Similarly, a nation is progressing if it has got a high GDP, GNP, but because these are numbers. Numbers are easy to crunch, numbers are easy to compare, and that is why the whole system is trying to do numbers. So now there are, you will hear terms like GDP, GNP, PCI. So what is the difference between GDP and GNP? Simply speaking, if somebody was to give me an answer, you can always Google search what is the difference between GDP and GNP. Anybody? Obviously, you can search. Who would tell me what is GDP and GNP? Anybody? Simply explaining GDP and so GDP stands for gross domestic product, GNP stands for gross national product. What is the essential difference between the two? Not in economics way, but in an English way. Guys, anybody? Anybody would like to? Yeah, Vinod.
So GDP is more about uh, the gross domestic product. That's the output that's sort of generated in a specific country or a nation or a geography types.
Okay. Okay. GNP.
It is pretty similar, but it need not have the boundaries, is what I think.
Okay. Anybody else? And as I said, you're free to search while we are doing.
Sir, domestic is local and national is overall view.
So GDP and GNP both calculate the sum total of production and services in terms of industrial production and services collected together. So GDP is territorial in the sense GDP, for example, GDP of India would be everything that is produced in terms of a product or a service in the territory of India. So if a multinational is in India and produces things and takes all the profit outside, it will still be part of the GDP, India's GDP. Whereas GNP is not territorial, but it's based on citizenship. So all Indians who are anywhere, producing anywhere. So for example, an Indian has a factory in UK and produces something there, it is a part of GNP. Whereas if it's an American company, so for if Amazon is doing sale in India or producing sale of goods or services and does a particular output and takes all the profit outside, but it is counted as India's GDP. So now when you understand this, you will realize that actually GDP and GNP, and then secondly, it is based on things produced or delivered in terms of products or services. Now, what about household work? It does not come as a part of services. There are so many work which is not looked as an economic activity at all, and yet people are employed in that particular activities, which does not the GDP and the GNP do not capture these products. So immediately you will understand that actually GDP and GNP are nothing but notional, and they do not reflect how the citizens are are being treated, or how their life is moving, or how their life is, or whether they are having a fulfilled life or not. And that is one of the reasons why possibly the economists and the statistician and the politicians like to throw the GDP figure, because it gets a very good feeling. Our GDP is 10 trillion, which does not imply anything with respect to what is being produced, how are the sectors doing, what is the state of individuals or families or anything. And again, per capita income, PCI is per capita income. Per capita income also becomes a strange kind of number, because if you have, it's like 10 students, one student getting 100 marks, 9 students getting 33, which is fail percent. If you have an average per student numbers, you will see that the whole class seems to have passed. It's kind of erroneous. So data is there, but it is kind of erroneous to understand individual students, or similarly in terms of individual citizens or the families. So that is how this growth and development becomes important to understand. And that's possibly as human beings went along and nations went along, they realized the fact that only economic numbers is not important. Some amount of qualitative data also becomes important, and the challenge was how to capture this qualitative data. So growth is normally quantitative, because measures the change in output of goods and services and income over time. And that is how things moved from growth into development. Again, most economists, when economics came as a subject, most of the economists, when they studied the world systems or nations, remember the large part of study happened in the global north, which is the Western countries. Now, these countries followed a particular path. And when these scholars studied those particular paths, they tried to make models and felt that these models should be applicable to the rest of the world. One of the important factor, which the reason why these models do not work for the rest of the world, was the concept of imperialism or colonization. So the Western countries actually colonized the rest of the world, and when they were trying to put these models on the rest of the world, they were not getting the desired result. So we will see during the course of the MDI 7 how these things change, and how some models which were proposed, some hold value, some do not. In fact, when I read MDI 7 and 8, I realize how things have changed very fast. All nations pass through distinct phase during the course of development. Then these scholars identified stages of development, phases of development that the nation passes through basis on production in primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. primary is, in terms of agriculture, in terms of mining. Secondary is in terms of industry. Tertiary is in terms of services. So broadly understand the fact that most of the scholars thought that nations would pass through the stages of primary, secondary, and tertiary. And inevitably, that is how they came out with policy prescriptions saying that as a nation develops, it moves from agriculture into industry, into services. Because that's how the Western nations did in terms of from agriculture into industry into services. These phases mark the stages of sectoral or structural shift in the growth process. And most of these scholars and economics came out with the same policy prescription. Study the mechanism or process of transformation of an underdeveloped economy from a largely traditional, characterized by subsistence agriculture, towards more modern, urbanized, and industrial diverse manufacturing and service. So they said that any country which needs to develop needs to follow a set model, which is to move from traditional into the service-based industry. We will see also during the course of this presentation, as well as the course of MDI 7 and 8 other units, that India actually moved from agriculture into services. It skipped the industrial part. In fact, there was a phase of a small industrial growth, but it stagnated. Various reasons. Again, we need to understand nothing is deterministic. However, most scholars tend to put things in a deterministic way, saying that, oh, these were the reasons why India leapfrogged from primary into tertiary. But there are many more factors which come into play. So sectoral composition of GDP and sectoral shift in employment. For any nation can be deconstructed into three components: primary agriculture, secondary industry, and tertiary services. What differs across country in share of each component in GDP, which in turn is related but not strictly to the stage of structure. So policy prescription was straightforward, that each country has to follow this linear path from primary into tertiary. And this was because they saw their own countries. So when they were making those models, they looked at the Western nations, how it moved, and they felt that's the way things moved in a linear fashion. And we will also see again in various units of MDI 7 and 8 that there are a lot of things which happen which make things not move linearly. So and then when things are moving linear, there are resource shifts which are happening linearly. Shifts from agriculture to industry, integral part of the development process, changes in elasticity, and similarly there is, and see now as we go, you will get to see new terms, elasticity of demand. So keep noting these terms down so that you can read a little bit more about it. How the demand changes, what is so you will have new keywords in terms of surplus value, marginal gain, marginal value. These are very economic terms. You can keep noting it down somewhere and reading a little bit more upon it to make a complete sense of what's going on. Along with the shift in resources occur shifts in proposition of labor force engaged in agriculture, industry, service, and obviously, if the means of production changes from primary into services, people are going to move from agriculture into services. So today, if we see India, there is a very large, what we call as gig economy. The Zomatos and the Swiggies and the Ubers and the urban clap. And you will see a lot of youngsters moving into these services. These are all services. So what happened to the industry in between? We shall see as we go along. And inevitably, if the country is not able to employ its force, its labor, or its workforce, or its labor into a workforce, then those people will migrate. They will migrate internally, or they will migrate internationally to find work wherever they can find. In fact, the three subjects that I'm taking in terms of labor, production, and human trafficking are all related, because if a country is not able to find work for its workforce or its labor force, workforce is the labor force which is working. If it is not able to find work for its labor force, the labor force will migrate to wherever it can find work. If it can find work internally, it will migrate internally. If it cannot find work internally, it will migrate internationally. Now, if people start putting barriers to migration, then people will do it illegally. And you see, inevitably, people will move. As I keep saying in all my classes, the story of human being is the story of movement. If you can understand this, you will find how when politicians try and make rhetoric about immigration, about illegal migration, it's pure rhetoric, because the whole history of humankind since its evolution is been a story of movement, and people continuously move. You try and stop movement, people will find ways of movement, legally or illegally. So Fisher and Clark argued that low developed countries, on an average, 65% of the labor engaged in agriculture and less than 20% employed in industrial sector. Sharp contrast, only 5% is engaged in agriculture, 30% industry in case of high income countries. So, and if you notice, when India got independent, the independent India's government had a lot of focus on industry, because the larger policy prescription was, if the country has to develop, it has to move from primary into secondary. And that is why all these steel plants and dams and all these things were set up. In fact, the Indian government set up a planning commission. They wanted to go in sort of a planning. Remember, another thing one needs to understand when we are looking at a country like India is the size and the diversity. Not only the physical size, but the population size. And to add to it, the diversity in terms of religion, in terms of language, in terms of culture. And now to try and get this country to move in some direction. So there needs to be some vision as to where you want a country to move or its citizens to move. Employment shifts are thus found to occur along changes in shift of resources and sectoral decisions. In fact, the Planning Commission's job was to do this sectoral allocation so that to be able to productively employ the labor force. Kuznets, in his various studies, also concluded changes in structures occurs first in the composition of production, followed by labor force composition of production, and finally the structure of foreign trade. Now, again, that is why I keep saying you have to read MDI 7 and 8 together to get a sense of what we are talking about. Because if you read 7, you will not be able to understand the composition of production and how production has changed. And once you understand how production is changing, inevitably you will understand why labor is moving wherever it is moving. And one of the easiest way to do it is how globally it is happening, because today a big factor of anything that we do internally is affected globally, affected by what happens in the world, because we are all connected. So if a new government in the US brings about tariffs locally or within the continent of North America, it will impact everybody in the world, each country in the world, and we shall see how. In MDI 8, we shall see how. If there is a war, a local war between Ukraine and Russia, the food prices across the world increases. We shall also see how, because globalization connects everybody. And in MDI 8, we shall read about supply chains. So, I'm putting in some words, these keywords, keep noting it down somewhere or keeping it in your mind, because some of these keywords will keep coming back and forth. Most countries underwent a development transformation. Share of agriculture and light in India's GDP at factor declined from 34 to 14. Now, again, for some reason, the Indian economists and a lot of planners, in their quest for following a Western constructed development model, forgot the fact that a large part of India's population was rural and agriculture oriented. And in their quest for moving the country into the second stage of industrialization, that is where there was a mismatch, because agriculture was still strong. There were changes which needed to be done in agriculture in terms of modernization. And it was a huge country with an extremely diverse country, and that is why there was all these different mismatches which was happening. However, unlike most other companies, the diversification of GDP in India occurred largely from agriculture to services and not from agriculture to industry. The industry could just not take off. It took off and stagnated. Because remember, while we were trying to put in an industry, and also understand, an industry is based on education, research, universities, basic education. India had a very high percentage of illiteracy. So, you try and produce that kind of literates, then you have to produce research, because unless you do R&D, industry cannot sustain. And meanwhile, the world is moving. So a whole lot of things happened. So there is a term called structural retrogression. Hypothesis of path of structural change from any nation by the resources endowment. And also then you need to understand structural changes is based in terms of resource endowment, both human and physical. For example, Japan does not have physical endowments, but they worked on the human endowment. China has both physical as well as human endowment. So inevitably, if you do not have physical endowment as a nation, then you find out places from where you can get the physical, like the minerals or anything else, or agriculture. And parallelly, these two have to work together. And its economic policies towards domestic market and foreign trade. Now, at the same time, you have to work on the domestic market in terms of how the sectors will move, as well as foreign trade, because inevitably trade also helps in the country developing. And we shall see in that unit, there's a unit on trade and employment and development, how trade influences employment and development. So found that the general pattern of shift or structural transformation from agriculture to industry and then to services did not occur systematically as proposed. That's because a huge country, a country just got independent, illiteracy, not enough human development, very diverse, trying to first form it as a nation. Remember, India was nothing but a lot of principalities, a lot of area under British India domination. Plus, then there was a partition. There were, refugees which came, which were exchanged. There were riots. So, to try to overcome that, obviously, things took their time. Structural transition, where the share of industry in the total output and employment initially increases and leads the path of growth, but falls after a certain period. That is what is called structural retrogression. Now, again, these are economic terms. So, economists have defined that if a structural transition happens where the share of industry grows, stagnates, and then falls down, it's called structural retrogression. So you need to understand that's how India went through. It's not only India, a lot of other countries especially in the third world or the underdeveloped countries, went through this structural retrogression. Distribution of sectoral employed hardly reflect any structural change in economy, indicate a declining, and parallelly a lot of factors happen. So a developed country, the GDP composition of agriculture is less. In India we saw the GDP of agriculture fall, but there were other factors which happened. Major role of services sector came, accompanied by a sluggish growth of industrial sector. Service suddenly took off, and one of the reasons was when India concentrated on providing higher education or professional education to people. We suddenly had a whole service sector in form of IT. So, there was this agriculture, there was this large part of India which was agriculture, and there was this new India which was the service, especially led by the IT, which was followed by hospitality, caregiving, and so on and so forth. But a large part started with IT. So look at the sectoral wise GDP. Now, you do not need to remember all these. What you need to understand is how India moved. India was an underdeveloped country in terms of a large percentage of GDP coming from agriculture, a large employment, percentage of people in agriculture. That thing fell down, but the industry never came up. And according to most of the models which were proposed by economists, the country needs to, in terms of its path to development, needs to move from agriculture into industry, into services. India leapfrogged. So if you see, look at the industry and construction sector. So in fact, in this industry and construction sector, the large part was construction and less was industry. Because suddenly urbanization took over, urbanization led to a lot of construction. And look at how the services sector has grown from 51, which was 31%, 2013-14, it was almost 60%. And we still had a large population employed in agricultural activities without modernization of agriculture. In fact, the crisis which is happening over the last few years, those farm law bills and the resistance to that is primarily because of the fact the modernization in terms of agriculture, in terms of modern equipment, in terms of how we are focusing, or our allocations of budget on modernization of agriculture is just not happening. And meanwhile, other factors are taking over. And then to add, there are the regional disparities. States policy. One of the reasons why a federal system works better than a centralized system is the fact that because of diversity, federal authorities are able to understand local issues and local allocations, whereas centralized is a one size fits all. And a country of the size and demography and the diversity like India, the federal the federal system makes more sense than a centralized system. However, historically, because when the time India got independent, as I said, there was the concept of India was very notional because there were a lot of princely states. There was British India, there was the partition. So a centralized system made sense. But over a period of time, instead of making it more federal, the government seems to have made it more central. By centering human and physical capital across all regions, social groups may enable all citizens to enjoy fruit of growth and development. Now, here the question is economic growth the model for making citizens, is growth and development the same thing? So, just because India reaches 3 trillion or 4 trillion or 5 trillion GDP, does the quality of life of Indians become better? Now that becomes another tricky question to answer. What is better? Because better is a very subjective term. And that is where the debate on growth and development comes in. Economic growth can be defined in quantitative concepts, the measure that changes in output of goods and services. So it measures the changes in goods and services. Growth of a country captured by per capita gross national product, which is the total value of good. So now this economic criteria you can divide nations in terms of rich, middle, and poor income countries based on GDP or GNP or per capita income. However, does it reflect whether the quality of life of a citizen or the way the citizen is able to spend his or her life in terms of fulfilling aspiration, goals, or whatever it is, can it be met by these pure numbers? The point is no, because inevitably, if you say your GDP is 7 million or 7 trillion or 10 trillion, and then we have a news of children dying out of starvation, that puts the whole story at odds with each other. It is something like saying that I earn 10 lakh rupees a month, but I have sugar and I have blood pressure and I have arthritis. Now, is my quality of life any better with the 10 lakh I earn per month? Now, this is a debate. You can argue it either way. Development, on the other hand, is a long-run concept that includes quantitative as well as qualitative changes in economy, of which economic growth is only one part. It aims at economic, social, and political well-being of people. Because at the end of the day, again, the story of a nation is the story of people. India does not exist in an abstract, form. You can't say India has a GDP, but Indians are dying out of starvation. That story is incongruous. So it has to finally, and again, it's a debate. What is a nation or a state or the government aiming to do? What is its brand vision? Mostly nation states were formed looking at a territory and citizens, because there is no nation states without citizens. There is no state without citizens. And if there is no state without citizens, what is the objective of state towards its citizens? One is security, of course. But is there something more than just the security? It also says security and well-being. Now, what is well-being? Is well-being good education, good health, good nutrition, the ability to, do what one wants to do in terms of political freedom, economic freedom? What? So these is, some sort of a larger, and that's what constitution of any country tries to determine as to what does this nation want to do. Aims at economic, social, and political well-being of people. You cannot, say that economic well-being, but the person is illiterate or the person does not have political rights. And we have seen there are enough nations which are nations in terms of nation states, but where people do not have political rights, where do not have economic rights, or some people have economic rights, some people do not have economic rights. Are they developed enough? Do we call them developed? Now, this is again a debate. There is no single definition or prescription of development, as the concept itself has evolved over time to accommodate and approximate fulfill the development goals of different societies. So the society and the state has to kind of figure out what is the goal of this nation. What is the goal of India? What is the goal of America? Is the American state or is the Indian state having a goal? Do the citizens be a part of that goal? And what is that goal? And what is the state supposed to do for citizens? So if the state is to give quality education to every child, then a free education is the goal of the state. If the goal of the state is to have each citizen healthy, to be productive and be an economic unit, then health should be free of cost. Then education and health are not freebies. The narrative that we have been hearing over the last few years about freebies, because they are used for economic development of a resource which is a human resource. And remember, labor is an embodiment of the human being. If the human being is not literate and is not a healthy human being, then you do not have labor, because these illiterate and unhealthy human beings cannot be productive economic units. And if they are not productive economic units, then the nation will not grow economically. So they are all interrelated again. I hope I'm not going too fast, guys. Guys, am I making sense? Not going too fast? Okay, there was some chat. Okay. What is the new message? There is one new message. Okay. Guys, am I making sense? Am I not? I hope I'm not going too fast. Okay. Okay. Vinod says thumbs up. Any other feedback? There are enough, guys. I hope I'm not going too fast. Am I making sense? As I said, you can stop me at any moment of time to ask me a question or to add whatever. Okay, Karan Veer also gives a thumbs up. I like this emoji communication. It's quick and fast. Concept of development factors in qualitative indicators like achievement of health, expansion of education, and human capital formation. Because remember, at the end of the day, it is the human capital. Because again, the labor is an embodiment of the human being. If the human is not able to develop, then you have an incomplete labor. An incomplete labor cannot add to your economic growth if the nation is looking at economic growth. So if you have a young adult who does not know how to use a computer, and if all jobs are computer based or app based, then you have a productive unit who cannot be a part of your workforce unless you train him. Training him would require additional resources. You see, it's a very intricate, holistic thing. Improvement in working conditions help people produce better. Domestic and international policies, market conditions, quality of life. Now think about the fact, if a person in a household is not getting drinking water but has to fetch water from outside, and if the unit is a husband and wife, and the wife is always busy in trying to fetch water, now obviously the quality of domestic life of this guy is not going to be of the same value as if he gets electricity, water, basic amenities. Then his quality of life is better. So if, as I say, if all of us are busy standing in lines doing our KYC, we are wasting economic time, or our economic unit is being diluted from production into non-productive work. You see, everything gets related. And if at the end of the day, the nation state wants every human being, which is a labor force, to be productive, then why get this non-productive work to be a major part of your work? Now, these are all debates which need to be talked about. So quality of life of individuals and groups becomes important. Hang on, there's a okay, Shabir Khan also. Confusing growth with development ignores how society is impacted by the distributional effect of economic policy. Now, if you say that, oh, we are a 5 trillion economy, but there is one unit or one family which is doing great, or as we say 5% of the population is doing great, and 65 to 70% of the population is trying to trying very hard to make ends meet, then actually when you look at the larger picture of development of the nation, you might say that you have not succeeded. The types of output that are produced, the economic environment in which they are produced, the actual achievement of attributes that one values and aspires to achieve. It's the same thing like a family. So you have a house where you have your parents, but the parents are continuously fighting. Now you let's say you are a student, now you come back home and you need to do your homework, but your parents are fighting. Or your or you need notebooks to do your homework and your parents cannot afford a notebook. So how do you do your education, or how do you fulfill your education? Or let's say you are in a family where the let's say the spouse is ill or the child is ill. Obviously you will not be able to deliver the kind of output that you can because of the illness. So each individual, unless individual or families or groups or societies or communities are not able to get what they aspire, obviously your economics will suffer. It's directly related. If the concept of development is to be reduced to a strictly economic one, the growth could be synonymous to development. Now this is also true. If you want to reduce development to growth, well, you could have industries producing more, you could have foreign companies coming which would be offering services, you can have your GDPs keep growing. You can call it development. In fact, if you see, a lot of media stories mix growth with development. So more often than not, it is easier to throw the number theory that we have reached this figure, we have done this, because it's easy. It's a reductionist kind of understanding. So how did it change? So over a period of time, economists also understood the fact that this economic growth and these numbers were meaningless when we are talking about population, when we are talking about nations, we are talking about citizens. And a lot of these economists then started having a human development approach. 3 interrelated basic components or core values of development: life sustenance, self-esteem, and the third is freedom. So at the end of the day, anything that you do, so for example, any job that you do today or any course, so for example, what is the objective of you taking a course like migration and diaspora? The idea is to get a degree, definitely a degree or a diploma, but then there is also an idea to increase your perspectives into this subject, to be able to get another avenue for a life choice. Now that is development. Otherwise, degree diploma is more quantitative, where you give your assignments, pass the examination, get a certain marks, you get a degree diploma. But you are looking at others, which is to get a different perspective, to get another career choice, to look at a life. All these things enhances the way we understand things. And when we understand things with different perspectives, it enhances our lives. It tends to get us into thinking different way, as well add on to our life choices and careers. So life sustenance, self-esteem, and self-esteem becomes important because at the end of the day, if you are psychologically not well, your well-being is not there, obviously you cannot produce as an economic unit. And freedom from want, ignorance, and squalor. So economists started looking at a development model. They started looking at the fact that it's not just numbers, but there is more importance to the ability of citizens to freely make their choices, range of choices, material improvement in their life standards. At the end of the day, that's what a state tries to achieve. According to Amartya Sen, our own Amartya Sen, the growth of per capita income does not define development, but is only a means to end. So you have an employment where you earn money, but that's a means, that's not an end. You have money to buy a car. The car is a means to an end. The end is to be able to go from point A to point B faster than what you would do if you were to walk. The car is not an end. Economics is not an end, it's a means. So if you're earning money, you will be able to eat nutritive diet to increase your life expectancy. Your life expectancy is the end. Money is not the end, it's a means. Economic growth is only one of the many aspects of process of economic development, premiered on the notion of functioning and expansion of entitlement and capabilities. At the end of the day, if you have, let's say you have a capability of understanding international relations and you are doing a Zomato job because you're not getting an opportunity, well, that is not utilizing your opportunity, your capabilities. No? If you have an intellectual capability but you're doing manual work, that is not, employing your capabilities. And that is not captured by measure of income and output growth. So economists realized they needed to do something more, to look at something more. Freedom retains the central focus. Famine, undernourishment, and morbidity, absence of provisions of basically, because at the end of the day, what is the role of a state? Now, that's where the vision comes. What is the role of a state? If British India had this big famine which happened in India, and that famine happened not because of the absence of food grain, but because of bad economic policies of British India. Millions died. Now, if you have a state where people are dying because of various reasons, then whatever is your GDP, GNP, per capita income really doesn't make a difference. Again, these are debates which the states can have, or politicians can have, or the political systems can have. Development conceived in this sense is essentially about the elimination of these unfreedoms. So if that is the kind of thought process that you have, then development is different than growth. GDP and PCI are average manners clearly indicate the unequal differences. Could be the outcome of rise in incomes of the richer group. Rise in the mean income may be unequal. As I gave you the example of students, so if a class has 10 students with one student getting 100 and the rest getting 33, an average would be everybody's passing. But actually 9 or the majority of the class is getting very poor marks, which could be the fact that the teacher might be really bad. Or the fact is the students are misfit in that subject. They should have been given some other subject. So when you start finding things qualitatively, then you figure out, how to get all of them to do better. Quantitative typically captures marketable products. Then what happens to non-marketable goods and services? Home consumption of crop by peasant, natural resources of living, women's contribution in household do not have any market, therefore not included in the calculation of income. And however, this becomes a very important becomes a very important activity. For all the household work, if the household work is stopped, then a lot of people cannot become economic units. So women who are doing household work is a very important activity, even though it is not calculated in terms of income. So all these things led into what we'll call the development economics. Very difficult to compare economic calculation. And then there is other factors, like very difficult to compare income calculated on the basis of different relative prices of products in different parts of the world. So something, for example, most of you may know or may not know, but the quantities of food ordered in America are much larger than the quantities of food which is delivered in India. So if you go to a restaurant, the meal size in America is much bigger than the meal size in India. There are so many things which are different values in different parts of the world. The demand for commodities, value attached to them, therefore prices differ, varying, making it very complex to compare incomes. And yet we are trying to compare incomes and says we are, this particular income vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis, each country is different. Each society is different. So that is the reason why this movement from quantitative to qualitative measures the amount and means about well-being. Okay, let's see what are, so quantitative. So what are the qualitative indicators? Like human development, physical quality. So there are physical quality of life index and HDI, human development index, two of the factors that we talk about, the qualitative factors, PQLI and HDI. So what is PQLI? PQLI composed of three components: infant mortality, life expectancy, and basic literacy. Again, as I said, economics is not a science. Most economists and theorists and scholars made theories based on context. So as the economists were understanding and moving away from the economic quantitative model into a development economic model, they were also trying to figure out how to capture these qualitative aspects, how to get these qualitative effects into some sort of a numbers to understand how the country is moving. So started off with PQLI, infant mortality, life expectancy, basic literacy. These indicators thus calculated were averaged to arrive at a physical quality of life index. There was an incongruence between GNP per capita and PQLI, indicating that high per capita income did not necessarily result in a better performance of health and literacy. So, for example, today, the state of Kerala has one of the highest human development indices, like the lowest maternal mortality rate, the lowest infant mortality rate, and some of the northern states have the highest. So, in fact, the northern states of India would compare themselves to sub-Saharan Africa, whereas Kerala has factors which is compared to most of the developed countries like Japan, US, Switzerland, Sweden. So PQLI had its limitations, which is why PQLI was the conceptual process that led to the development of PQLI, paved the way for the formation of HDI, Human Development Index, because inevitably PQLI did not capture any economic criteria. The principal difference between PQLI and HDI factor that later includes both physical and financial. So Human Development Index also includes a component of the economic criteria. So now you can say this particular state or this particular country has a high economic growth, but the other factors are low, so that averages out. Since the publication of HDI report in 1990, the human development approach to development became widely popularized. So today, HDI is the predominant form of measuring development. And HDI was developed by Pakistani economics Mehbul al-Haq. Amartya Sen has very useful contributions in it. Explicit purpose to shift the focus of development economics from national income accounting to people-centric policies. Because at the end of the day, the thought was that it's the people. which is the most important? A nation without its citizens is not a nation. It's an abstract thing. And if citizens are the most important, then what is the state doing for the citizens? He believed that a simple composite measure of human development was needed to convince the public, academicians, and politicians that they can and should evaluate development, not because otherwise it is very easy to throw numbers. We have done so much, we have achieved so much, so many people came, numbers. So HDI came about, three components: longevity measured by life expectancy at birth, knowledge measured by educational attainment, and income measured by GDP per capita. So longevity only can happen if you have good nutritional status, good health status, and literacy, knowledge measured by educational attainment. Despite inclusion of income variable, greater emphasis given to social progress, such as the income is not treated as a means, but in terms of the purpose it can serve to achieve the social progress. So the state must have a vision as to what the state wants to do. The government must have a vision as to what the government wants to do. And that vision has to be backed by allocations in terms of sectoral allocations or budget allocations in terms of what it wants to do. So 2022 HDI index of select countries, I was able to get this chart. And if you notice, India is 134. Number 2 is Norway. I think Switzerland is number 1. Switzerland or Sweden, one of the two countries. But you have to understand, in this, you've also to understand, as I keep saying earlier, and I keep repeating, India is a huge country, which is extremely populous and extremely diverse. So comparing India to a country like Norway, Germany, Switzerland, or Sweden, again, does not make sense, because there will be hundreds of Switzerland in India. China is at number 75. India is at, so if you see, China is also pretty low. So this is the HDI. Again, as I said, this gives you a snapshot. There's nothing that you need to remember or do. Despite successes of HDI in offering a better measure, the index still does not fully capture the concept of human development, because there's a limited number of variables taken. Again, remember, in any research, what are the variables taken, what are the numbers taken, how is the survey done, what is captured. It is like in your research and methodology courses, you will see, based on the question that you ask, how you frame the question, who do you ask the question, and the way the question is asked, the responses will be different. So if you start with a bias and say that this is what you want to find out, and frame your question that, you will get a reply which will exceed to your biases. It is something like this: a lot of urban people go out into, let's say, a slum, or to underprivileged people, and ask the children, what will you become when you become big? When you grow up, what do you want to become? More often than not, the child will answer a teacher, a doctor, or a policeman. And the middle class boy or girl is extremely happy, because inevitably they are already biased, because that's the kind of response they want. The child already knows the kind of response this person wants, and your whole experiment is flawed. HDI has limited the objectives of human development to only education, literacy, health, and survival, and increased income. It excludes other important dimensions of well-being, such as political freedom, social freedom, and capability to participate in community and political decision making. So obviously these also become a factor, because if these are not a factor, then let's say the Middle East countries, there are a lot of freedoms which are not there, and these people might be rich, but there is a disquiet out there. which we saw during the Arab Spring. So then there is a new factor, which there are a couple of new, indices which got developed. There was one which is called gender. These are not very popular, but there are definitely these indices which economists are trying to figure out whether they make sense. For example, Gender Development Index. So when you are in HDI, women hold a separate place because 50% of the population of the world are women. And more often than not, most indices focus men. Average achievement, GDA adjusts the average achievement to reflect inequalities between men and women. For example, women still earn less than men across the world, including US. Gender gap in human development achievement. GDI also measures 3 basic dimensions of physical and financial attributes of development. So these are, so if you have a short answer question which saying that which are the various development ways of measuring development, you can definitely mention gender development index. If you want to read more, you can Google and find out more about it. Health is measured by female and male life expectancy. Education is measured by female and male expectancy. You know very well that in a lot of households, it's the males which eat first, the females eat second. Whatever is left is given to the women. In rural India, milk more often than not is not given to the women, it's only boys. In terms of education, the boys are put in private schools, the girls are put in government schools, and they drop out. In healthcare, if a boy and a girl fall ill, the boy is taken to the hospital, the girl is taken next if they have the money. So all these things are there. Then there is a multidimensional poverty index, MPI, published for the first time in Human Development Report 2010, premised on the understanding that poverty like development is multidimensional. Complements monetary measures of poverty by taking into consideration other kinds of deprivations, income suffered by people at the same time, deprivations across the same 3 dimensions as HDY. So there are deprivations. How much deprivation is there? So for example, I would typically give you the example of the Delhi, Delhi government and the new party which came in 2013, when they decided to give each household 20 kiloliters of water. Now, this was a great debate which happened. Why give water free of cost? So the argument which was proposed was the fact that water is a basic sustainability. Nobody can sustain life without water, and every family should be given that 20 kiloliters of water. So there was this argument and there was this debate about economics of it, whether it is a freebie. The party and the government at that time said that water is a basic essentially and we need to give it. And actually it was proved the fact that if you give 20 kiloliters of water, the economics does not move too much this way or that way, because they had some other conditions which helped them overcome this water economics. But at the end of the day, water, air, and food are 3 basic things without which, and shelter, without which human beings cannot exist. Then there is something called World Happiness Index. When people are healthy and happy, so for example, Bhutan is top of the charts in terms of happiness index. When people are healthy and happy, they tend to take social responsibility, increase social relationship, compassionate attitude, and obviously that will increase their productivity. Report articles and ranking based on corresponding ratings of their own correlates with various factors. Finland has been ranked as the happiest country in the world 7 times. Oh, okay. March 24, Finland has been ranked the happiest country in the world 7 times in a row. Bhutan, for example, is much, much happier than India. India is pretty low on the happiness index also. And again, it depends on what factors are taken, who is taking that survey, when is the survey taken, what questions are framed, how are the questions framed, and so on and so forth. Then there is something called a Happy Planet Index, introduced by the New Economic Foundation in July 2006. 3 components of HPI are experienced well-being, expectancy, and ecological footprint. So again, remember, scholars, economics, try to look at various things. Again, this is not a science. You cannot test it in a lab. They look at a particular context, try and make a model. Those models may not be successful. They may not be one size fits it all. Yet, this is a continuous endeavor to find out how else development can be measured. Surveys conducted to get data. Again, whenever a survey is conducted, there is a element of error. CO2 emissions associated with manufacturing of mobile phones made in China will count towards Chile's economic footprints if it is bought by someone living in Chile. So how these methodologies are made determines the result of these indexes. Then, as I told you, there are regional disparities. Even if a country is high on HDI or high on economic development, there are regional disparities. So, for example, if you see today in India, the South is definitely doing much, much better than some of the northern states. In fact, some of the northern states were early called the Bimaru states because their human development indexes were very low. Today, again, states like MP, UP, Bihar have very bad maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and so on and so forth. And again, it all depends on what the focus of the state is in terms of its citizens. Attempts have been made to explain the mechanism of this perpetuation of development gaps. Now, there are various ways these development gaps come in. A host of reasons in terms of endowment, location, climate factors, political factors, physiographic, ethnicity, impact of government's growth and development. You must study the difference between Faridabad and Gurgaon and how the Haryana governments of earlier time gave emphasis on Faridabad, which developed as an industrial hub and subsequently got ignored when the focus shifted on Gurgaon, and Gurgaon developed as a corporate hub, and Faridabad went into a disarray. So, you know how the governments even focus on areas changes the way the areas move. Countries which are more or less give importance to physical and human capital accumulation along with technical progress were able to progress. So if you want to develop industries, you need to have a very strong R&D base. For having a very strong R&D base, you need to invest heavily into primary, secondary, and tertiary education. You need to have a very strong R&D base in the universities. Somewhere down the line, unless these are synergized, things will not happen. Growth of Japan, Hong Kong, Korea, Taiwan during the period 65-90 explained largely on account of investment in physical and human capital. Human capital becomes a very important factor. Okay, so let's sum up. All nations pass through distinct phases. Economic growth can be defined quantitatively. Changes in output of goods and services. Development, on the other hand, is a long-run concept, qualitative and quantitative. And there are some references, which is there in the unit. If you do not have the unit, remember all the units are there at eGyan Kosh. You can download them. Let me stop sharing and put on my video if I can. Hi guys, any questions? I hope I did not go very fast. And as I said, I have tried to keep and not just this unit, all subsequent units in MDI 7 and MDI 8 to basic English language rather than economics, so that you are able to understand the overall subject and able to answer questions in terms of your assignment or exam, rather than get stuck on the economics part. But in case you're an economics student, you can go and read the unit, and you can there are a lot of formulas and charts given. I have purposefully cut that out. Any questions? Guys.
Sir?
Yeah, Gurpreet.
Sir, development versus urbanization. In Punjab, the Ludhiana district where I live, Ludhiana has eaten away the fertile land of about more than 100 villages since independence. Now that speed is very fast. The houses construction is neither as per requirement nor as per planning. It's the land mafia, constructing the houses, purchasing the land, and the market value and the state value difference is 3 to 4 times. A acre of land at the highway or a state road is 1 crore as per government. What as for the market value, it goes to 4 to 5 crores.
5 crores.
That black money, sir, how it affects the youth, how it affects the
Correct.
labor, and how it compels the youth to migrate.
Correct.
So your kind suggestions, sir, your kind comments.
See, again, Gurpreet, as we said, the urbanization is a totally different ballgame. Policy making is an absolutely different game. Now you are trying, and then remember, there is the politics of the state. So when we are talking about growth and development, if you notice, most governments have never come out with white papers or a large, stating as to what is the objective of this particular government. What is that? And then once you make that objective, remember there are multiple engines which are running together.
Sir.
As you rightly said, urbanization is one engine which is moving very fast because everybody wants urban amenities. Also understand, agriculture is a non-profit occupation. Because of increase of population, land holdings have fragmented. Land holdings are fragmented. A lot of youngsters are not interested in doing agriculture. They sell off their lands and move into urban places. Now this engine has to develop on its own, and that is why, if you notice, this decentralization of power between state, between center, between state, between local governments, all these things were done for a reason. Because for a simple reason, a state is a big unit. State is comprises of districts. Districts is comprises of blocks. Blocks are comprises of. Now these powers have somehow not been distributed, encouraged, or used, and inevitably that's where the messes come about. Because
Sir.
who is in control?
True,
And
sir.
please understand, then to top it all, there is the politics. The politics of parties, the politics of elections. So inevitably this mess happens because of, all these engines need to be either some sort of a policy framework or some sort of a regulation. I was seeing in Punjab is now come out with some policy on crushing, on in terms of mining. Some policy needs to come out for the state to, or the state officers to understand what to do. Now meanwhile, another thing has happened. Because of the rise of the gig economy and the service sector and the warehousing model, today a large part of the businesses is in terms of warehousing and movement of goods, the service sector.
Sir.
And they would want to get areas very close to the highways to be able to move goods because there is profit in terms of, and that is why prices of lands have gone up.
Sir.
So unless various aspects of governance or branches of government, there is some policy how these segments are interacting with each other, they will be mess. And remember, it's huge country. A state of Punjab itself is huge, with a huge population, a huge diversity of population, religions, migrants. How do you manage it? No wonder there is a mess which is happening. Gurpreet?
Say got it, but net zone area is depleting fastly.
So obviously it will, because everybody wants an urban. See, remember, when India got independent, one of the statements which Mahatma Gandhi made was, let's have local industries at the rural level.
Sir.
But the exigencies of independence got heavy industries into certain areas. Now what happens is, when you get an industry, an industrial area gets formed. Now, as the area becomes bigger, it starts eating into the rural areas. So what happens to people in the rural areas? You are not giving them amenities. There is no source of employment. What are these people supposed to do? Their skill levels are not there. You have not given them education. You have not given them health. What they are supposed to do? So they all come to the urban areas and they make slums out there. Meanwhile, the urban areas keep on expanding.
Sir.
So you say, Gurpreet, it's not a very straightforward, policy formulation or a magic which can happen. There has to be policy. There has to be various segments of the governments need to have interrelation, and somebody has to have and then some sort of a federal planning needs to be done. A centralized planning will not work in a country like India because it's too huge and too diverse, and we are still looking at a lot of centralized planning. So a person sitting in Delhi, how does he know what's happening in Ludhiana, or let's say a district of Jharkhand or a district of Bengal? This IS officer will make a plan which is uniform for all.
Sir.
So you see, that's where things fall between stools. Repeat.
Right, sir. Got it.
Okay.
Even, sir, the policy of agriculture zones is not being followed.
So would not be, because inevitably, what are the policies? How is agriculture being modernized? So as I was giving an example earlier, so what happens is when how does this crop burning happen? Crop burning happened because people started using their jet pumps to draw water. I'm giving a Punjab example. People started drawing water because the canals went into disarray. So people started using bore pumps and drawing water. Once they started drawing water, the water level fell down. When water level fell down, what Punjab government did, they said that the paddy which is done during the rainy season should be delayed, because it gets delayed so that the rain comes, people draw less water. Now, when it got delayed, the paddy started getting harvested in October. Now, when it starts getting harvested in October, it starts cooling down. When it starts cooling down, and now what happens? They use a combined harvester because mechanization has happened. Now, mechanization has happened, combined harvester, stocks are left. Labor has become expensive. Agriculture is not even profit making. So what they do is best is to burn. Burning has an advantage that it takes care of the pests.
Sure.
Now, when they burn, all the air rises up and settles in Delhi. So you see, everything is interrelated. And unless somebody thinks end to end, what we are doing in today in terms of governance is knee-jerk reaction. This is happening, let's do this. But that has some intended and unintended consequences. Everything has intended and unintended consequences. If you set up a factory in Gurgaon, the unintended consequences, there's going to be a large migration from rural areas into urban areas, which you are not geared for. So urban slums will come. Unintended drugs will come. Prostitution will happen. Because all these guys will come without families. Prices will rise up. So, inevitably, development is not a single, it's a very complex animal. It's a jungle, and it's, there are multiple animals. So unless somebody thinks through at, smaller levels rather than a one size fit all, we will have problems of that kind.
Thank you, sir. Got it.
Okay. Any other question, guys? Any question? Okay. In case there is no other question, as I said, you can always contact me on my I am finally on WhatsApp. I'm giving you my WhatsApp number. Hang on. Meeting. Okay. You can always reach out to me on my WhatsApp number. You can send me a WhatsApp any query. I will see you tomorrow at 12:30 with MDI 008 Unit 1. You have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful week ahead, and the rest of the classes. Good to meet you again, and see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.